Hi, I'm Michael. Welcome to Beyond the Screenplay, the podcast where each episode we do a conversational deep dive analysis into a film. Today, we are kicking off our Spy Spring mini-season with The Bourne Identity, the 2002 film written by Tony Gilroy and William Blake Herron, directed by Doug Liman, based on the book The Bourne Identity by Robert Ludlum. I'm joined by the Beyond the Screenplay team, Trisha Rand.
Hello, everyone.
Brian Bittner.
I assume that's me. Hello, hello.
And Alex Galleros.
Hi.
Okay, so like I said, we're doing a little mini season where we're talking about the Bourne Identity, the Bourne Supremacy, and the Bourne Ultimatum, the Bourne Trilogy. As I understand it, there are no other Bourne films besides those three.
Yep, you got it.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're going to cap it all off with a patron exclusive episode on GoldenEye because it's spy related, but also we just want to talk about GoldenEye. First Pierce Brosnan Bond. It's going to be fun. We're going to do a live stream of the recording for patrons. So patrons, you can join and talk in the chat and ask us questions and giggle along with us, as I'm sure there will be much giggling about the GoldenEyes.
Legs. Very strong legs in that movie.
Yes, indeed.
There really are.
Indeed. I think that was the first CD I bought was the soundtrack to GoldenEye. We'll talk about that in the Patreon episode. Lots of fun memories there. Anyway, okay, so let's get started with the Bourne Identity. So I saw this in theaters. I don't really remember my first experience, but watching it again, I remembered a lot of it. And so I must have seen it more than just that one time when it came out 22 years ago or whatever it is. And I've always had kind of like a weird relationship with the Bourne movies where they kind of all mushed together in my brain. And so I'm excited to be going back and watching them again so I can kind of piece out and separate, oh, that was from this one and that one's from that one. Julie Stiles is still in this. That's cool. Like that whole thing. Identity as a movie itself has kind of always been like, yeah, okay, that's fine. Like for me. But the effect that it had on movies and the sequels, like there's just something really interesting about this IP and this franchise that I'm starting to reappreciate as we're going through and watching these movies again. So I think this is going to be a really interesting journey to talk about this moment in time, the effect that these movies have had, Matt Damon. There's just a lot of Matt Damon happening, which is fun. So there's a lot of things to talk about, but I want to hear from Trisha, pulling a name out of a hat.
Sure.
How do you feel about the Bourne movies?
As you very well know, I love these movies. And I saw this movie in the theater. It was probably the third or fourth weekend that it was out. There was sort of a slow build on it in terms of like box office. It did end up making a lot of money, and it did receive largely positive reviews at the time, but it wasn't being positioned as like a huge summer blockbuster. Like it didn't have any huge A-list stars in it kind of thing. And it was kind of thought to be and positioned by the studio as like a standard genre, like action movie. And so people were still discovering it after a few weeks in the movie theater. And that's when I discovered it myself. It was a sparsely attended show. I went with my cousin and we were just like rocked by this movie. We just had an absolute blast seeing it. It was like we had gone to an early show. I don't know why. And we tried to go back and see it again the same night. Like we just fell for it really hard. And we couldn't go see it again the same night. But we grabbed another one of my cousin's brother, and he came with us the next day and we went and saw it again the next day. And the second day that we went to see it was also like a matinee, and there was no one else in the theater besides us. And my younger cousin, who I had seen it with the first time, my cousin Anna, she's a gymnast. And so while we were waiting for the movie to start, she was like doing back handsprings down the aisleway. I was just like so pumped to see this movie again. Anyway, I adore it. I really, really love this movie and this entire franchise. I've seen this movie more times than I can count. It was incredible incredibly influential, and we can get into all of that. And it's really interesting. I think of it now when I watch it as sort of a time capsule. I still really enjoy it in and of itself. I think it's a very solid movie. But I just know so much about it, and so much time has elapsed now that it's just like, it's one of these movies that is more of, I don't know, more of like a concept, or like more of just like an artifact in some ways than it is like a movie in and of itself to me. And I think to a lot of people, I don't know, I want to interrogate all of this. But yeah, I love it, heart and soul. I love Bourne. I love Marie. I love the whole vibe, the world, the color, the grit, the soundtrack, the everything. It was just like, give it to me. I'm all about it. So I can't wait to dive into it with you guys.
Nice. Yeah, I like the framing of it as an artifact. Like for me, that's helped me in this rewatch, because I watched it like kind of last year and I was like, I don't know about that. But like remembering the period of time that it came out, like just really helps me reappreciate, and just I find it really interesting to dive into. So yes, as an artifact, I feel like this film and these films are like really interesting also.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Brian, what about you?
I also love this franchise, but the first movie was a bumpy start for me. I think I saw the trailer and was just like, oh, it looks fine. It looks kind of forgettable. And then a coworker at the time, I worked at American Eagle, which is a weird fact about me, was like, oh, it was really good. And I was like, all right. So I went and saw it in the theater, and I'll invoke the peak end rule and say, I don't know if there were any really high peaks for me. Not that I didn't enjoy it overall. But then the low peak was the climax of this movie is he rides a big dude down a bunch of stairs and shoots a guy on the way down, and then because that happens towards the end of the movie, that was also the taste was like still in my mouth when the credits rolled. So I didn't hate it, but I just was kind of like it was a fine movie that had like a pretty bumpy ending for me. And then three things happened. One of which was I read about the production of the third act of this movie, which was big explosion, like gas station or something was supposed to happen, and 9/11 happens, and then they're kind of like, what do we do with movies about like explosion, all this kind of thing. And so then they had to kind of backpedal and do something else. So it was kind of like, okay, still don't love the ending, but at least I understand that was not the intention. It was like to be like, that's the big finale of the movie, is like you shoot a couple guys in a stairwell and you ride one down. And then the second thing that happened was I rewatched the movie, and obviously knowing what it was, there was definitely something about the mood and the vibe of this movie that really started to kind of sink in for me the second time I watched it. And that's the thing I love mostly about this movie. I think it's in all three. I'm excited to rewatch 2 and 3, but I feel like this movie just has a kind of that sort of scruffy art house European kind of aesthetic going for it that makes it feel very different than a lot of other action movies, but also just gives it kind of a soul. And the sort of emotional moments in this movie just hit in a really kind of lovely way. And then the third thing that happened was I saw The Bourne Supremacy, which I think clicked for me. And I was just like, 2004 was just an incredible year for movies. And that movie I think that was when I went, yeah, I do like this thing, whatever this thing is, I do like it. And then by ultimatum, I was like, yeah, let's go. So it was a slow build, but I got there. So I'm excited it's interesting rewatching this because it does show its age a little bit. But there's stuff about this movie that I love, and there's some stuff about it that's like, yeah, we wouldn't probably do this today. So we'll get into all that. On a side note, I don't know who the PR guy for memory loss was during this decade, but Memento 2001, Mulholland Drive, Memento 2000, Mulholland Drive 2001, Majestic 2001, Bourne Identity 2002, Paycheck 2003, 51st Dates 2004, Notebook 2004, Eternal Sunshine 2004. And then there's like The Sixth Sense and Fight Club sort of like don't know your own identity thing, which then spawned like Secret Window, Number 23, Shutter Island. You know, it was just like this decade was just like no one knows who they are at all.
Amnesia was really having a moment there.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, those are my initial thoughts.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. The strange cultural ebbs and flows that occur. Cool. All right, Alex, what about you?
Yeah, this movie is really interesting for me because you mentioned the artifact element of it. And I think the Bourne Identity, the Bourne franchise in my head has been more of an idea than an actual movie or series of movies. I kind of forgot about the actual movie and just know it as the thing people refer to when other movies have shaky cam. or other movies like cut too much. And I started to think of the Bourne franchise as like the thing that ruins stuff for me, because I want action to be shot clearly. And I love when things are captured in one-ers or clear choreography or clear, visual language between shots. And there have been a lot of movies over the last 20, 30 years that, we kind of talked about this in our film club recently. We talked about this movie in film club, and we were thinking about the fact that digital editing had come onto the scene as like the new primary way to edit movies. And when you can just non-linearly screw with stuff on a computer, you could, this kind of world of more creative MTV style editing opens to you. And I think I have been placing the blame on lazy action editing on these movies, because I think what I don't like is when I see a film where they did not really have good choreography. They didn't really have a good plan for how the sequence was going to unfold. And so you just make it feel more exciting, more interesting than it is by cutting between 1,000 shots rapidly. Watching these movies again, I do feel like this first movie does have some editing problems for me. But then I watched the second movie, which I thought was going to piss me off more, because Paul Greengrass is kind of notorious for the documentary style, shaky cam, rapid cuts. But there was a more cohesive vision actually in the Bourne Supremacy, the second movie. And I actually didn't mind it most of the time. And I actually found that there was a flow to it that felt intentional and good. So now my brain is scrambled. And now I'm like, wait, I can't blame this franchise, isn't to blame for everything, because this was actually using this form well. And I think part of the bumpiness of Identity, and still talking about just pure form here, I don't feel like all that intent is there. When we're in scenes in the CIA where we're kind of orbiting around all these guys talking, and the cuts kind of are awkward and not really happening at the right place, or we're cutting between two shots that are kind of a jump cut and not really shots you want to cut between. The Doug Liman mess of it all in Identity is like a mess that doesn't feel as good as the Paul Greengrass mess in the preceding movies. So that's a lot of thoughts about editing, but I think I wanted to bring that up because I think a lot of my prejudice towards these movies was the idea of them as everybody decided to do shaky cam, rapid cutty, nonsensical action after these movies, and it's all their fault. And I'm seeing actually now, especially in the sequel movies, this is actually well done. So I'm having to really recalibrate. But yeah, I'm also in the same train as Michael and Brian as far as Supremacy. I really enjoyed revisiting, actually not revisiting, seeing for the first time. And at Bourne Identity, revisiting, I had seen it for sure, still is bumpy for me. But I want to dissect all the things that it did add to our kind of modern spy action toolkit, Hollywood toolkit, the both the good and the bad, because I think there is both good and bad that it brought to the table.
Yeah. I want to defend and explain to listeners a little bit about this movie just right out of the gate, in case listeners might not know, which is that there's sort of like a legend around the Bourne Identity's film production as being troubled. And when people say that, it can mean a variety of things. But in this case, what that means is that Doug Liman had a drastically different vision for this than the studio. This is a Universal movie. Universal did was not trying to do something like avant-garde or weird, which is interesting, considering they hired Doug Liman, who was, kind of an indie director. And Lyman and Tony Gilroy were very much working as a unit and had a very clear vision for the script and the story they wanted to tell, the adaptation that they wanted to make. I say adaptation very loosely. Tony Gilroy really wanted to use as little of the novel as possible. And basically just wanted to and in Tony Gilroy's defense, the novel is set in the Cold War. It's set in 1980 or whatever. And so Tony Gilroy was like, none of this makes any sense in 2002. And so let's just toss all of this out, toss it out, and just start with a spy who doesn't know who he is and go from there. And Doug Liman was kind of obsessed with the book and really, really wanted to make it. But a different studio was sitting on an option for it until 1999. They sat on an option for it for 15 years. And so finally, Doug Liman was able to get the rights back in 2002. In 99, and then he took it to Universal, blah, blah, blah. And so he and Tony Gilroy really, really wanted to make this kind of what you see, which is this grounded, gritty, small scale, relatively small scale for an action movie. And the studio did not want that. They wanted to make a more by the numbers thing, especially in this time. And so, there's also a Doug Liman way of working, which is a bit off the cuff, is how I'm going to describe it. And Tony Gilroy's doing rewrites every day and faxing the pages into the set. And Doug Liman is just making stuff up as he goes along. And meanwhile, the timeline's getting longer. The budget's going up. I think it was $8 million that they ended up going over by on the budget. So meanwhile, the studio is just getting unhappier and unhappier about the whole thing. And so when we say all of that, it kind of explains a little bit about what we have. But at the end of the day, most of the fights, creative fights, Doug Liman won. And if he had lost those fights, we would have had a much more by the numbers, 90s style espionage adventure, and it would have been probably slick and quippy and kind of the things that we associate with the 90s style of movie. And Lyman really stuck to his guns about just about everything that he possibly could, including the politics of this movie, which I think are interesting. But yeah, there's some background here that I think informs the way that we read the finished product. And to your point, Alex, I think you can, in a lot of scenes themselves, you can see the push-pull happening on the screen of we're here, nobody really knows what we're shooting today, maybe, or we got the pages this morning. And the fact that it clicks together at all and became as influential as it did, I think is really impressive. And probably to Doug Liman's credit, but also when you're at the helm, everything's your fault, as well as everything's your achievement. So you take that for all that you will.
Yeah. I feel there are truly moments that feel like they're suddenly out of a different movie, or when Bourne and not Maria, what's her name? Marie. Okay, I was confused. Get to his apartment and they're looking around, and then Bourne's got a sixth sense about something bad's going to happen. Up to that point, it has been kind of grounded and believable action and normal stuff. And then a guy swings through the window with a machine gun firing. I don't understand what his thought process was, but he swings in, and then there are multiple moments where he falls down, but then he jumps up into frame he's the Terminator, and he's I'm coming at. And so it's this weird, that bad guy in particular, certain moments in that feel oh, that's old cheesy action. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't mesh with the gritty, I'm going to grab a pen and jab it into your hand, fight that's happening in the middle of those moments. And so that sequence really, to me, felt like this kind of dueling stylistic sequence of different cinematic languages. And I could almost see someone a studio note being no, it's got to be cooler, bigger action, blah, blah, blah. And that disrupting maybe what was going on.
Yeah.
Even the way he jumps out the window feels almost a little bit like Looney Tunes. Like, it's just like, what?
Yeah.
And even then, like, Franca Potente's delivery of the line right after is pretty funny, right? Where she's like, why would someone do that?
Exactly.
Yeah. I feel like this also, the hearing about the script writing process, like, also explains some of the bumps for me, where, like, structurally, I feel like there are moments where it feels like I'm very much on board and we're doing what we need to do. And then there are other moments where I'm like, wait, why are we here spending time with this person or privying this information over that information? And so it is this kind of weird, like, mixed bag in a lot of ways. And I think that's maybe why it, like, hasn't ever quite worked for me, but it does also clearly is more than the sum of its parts in a pretty, like, incredible way. Like, I can definitely see and acknowledge that 100%.
Yeah, and another thing, we've talked about this with comic book movies, but another thing that was happening during this decade, other than no one could remember who they were, was studios making these clear choices to give big blockbustery franchises to smaller art house and indie directors. You know, so it's like, what if the guy who directed Swingers directed the Bourne Identity? What if the guy who directed Crouching Tiger directed Hulk? What if the guy who wrote Swingers did Iron Man? The guy who did Memento does Batman, right? It's just like these things that don't make sense on paper. But, you know, some of those movies I just listed, it was to really good results, and some, you know, it always wasn't. But what you get is a director who has, like, a really off kind of interesting way of looking at the world and looking at cinema, taking on something that is more mainstream. But then what you also get is a studio going, wait a minute, but we want this movie to be like, well, it's like, well, then don't hire me. If you want to do it that way, like, go hire Michael Bay or go hire, you know, whoever. So it was an interesting time, and it still happens. You know, we've got, like, Taika with Thor Ragnarok and stuff, especially in the, like, the Marvel world. But it was just an interesting time where I think studios were trying to figure out kind of what that next thing was. Yeah. And it's fascinating with Bourne to Batman Begins to Casino Royale, to Collateral, you know, this interesting sort of era of, like, what is the new action movie? What is the new blockbuster, right? If it's not going to be everything is perfectly framed and everything is brightly colored and stuff, what is it? What can we get a visionary director to do that's going to push that needle? You know, and Bourne definitely, as we talked about, push that needle.
Well, I think, Trisha, you mentioned earlier the European art house vibes. And, you know, I also just love European globetrotting movies of any sort. The Bond movies do that. The Mission Impossible movies do that. This movie does that. And
Ocean's 12, weirdly.
Right. And yeah, and I think that's why this movie, on the one hand, feels like this really kind of special auteur movie. And that's why there's moments that feel so jarring to me, like when it goes into agent activation montage. And there's that kind of early 2000s, late 90s, like, you know, computer graphics and, you know, rapid flashing to white
and
as we
the state and Charlie's Angels.
Exactly. Like
the typing sound as we see the name of the location we're in. Yeah.
The Tony Scott kind of thing. Yeah. And that was kind of interesting in this movie. That's part of the artifact thing, where you got this almost pushing forward to the era, Brian, you're talking about, which is we want to bring some of that art house vision to blockbusters, and that makes something more special than just another generic Hollywood action movie. And yet there's these moments that feel so of the time, or so of, like, the immediate past, which are these, kind of by the numbers, flashy, cool montages. And that's where, you know, that's why I think the Greengrass movies work better for me, because they feel like they fully shed those kind of, like, artifacts and now are fully themselves. They're just doing the one thing. Whereas this movie is that kind of interesting hodgepodge. That's how it felt to me. Yeah.
I feel like this movie didn't have the benefit of coming out after it came out.
Exactly.
Like,
exactly.
It forged a new territory, and that was messy. And I think if it had been able to, like, oh, now I can make that movie again, it could be more wholly itself. And I think it'd be even more impressive and not that it is impressive, but it would feel more whole and without that baggage.
Well, and to me, one of the most impressive choices that Doug Liman made here was Franca Potente. Like, I think the cast is really fascinating and like, I don't know, just sort of speaks to what he wanted this to be probably. Like, I think that, you know, Damon was a good choice, like, and we can talk more about him. He was not an action star in any way at this point. You know, he'd kind of been, you know, he's doing like Good Will Hunting and Talented Mr. Ripley and a couple of other things. But like, he's a drama guy, essentially, right? With like a little bit of like comedic chops here and there, but is kind of doing drama. And is just like, you know, a good looking young man who does drama, pretty much. And he really, Damon really leaned into the action elements of this. But he wasn't, again, he was not an A-list star at all. But Franca Potente, to cast her as the female lead in this, in your spy thriller movie, she's a foreign film actress to American audiences at the time. You know, and had been in Run Lola Run, which was a very well-received movie here in the States as well as internationally. It's a German movie that she was the star of, but it's like, it's still not, it's not a household name. It wasn't then, it isn't now. And to cast her as the romantic lead in this, and then also like let her basically be her own type, right? She is kind of this, like, she's got an interesting face. She's kind of an alt looking girl at the time. And just, you know, you just let her be who she is. She kind of has this like self-assured way about her, kind of combative, loner edge to her also. And she's not your spy girlfriend in a movie, in any sort of typical, there's no form already made for this character. She makes the form herself.
Comparing all this to GoldenEye is going to be very interesting.
Oh, isn't it
comparing
though?
And contrasting. Yeah.
And I love everything about that choice. I love everything about the manifestation of the character, the casting of the character. I love how Franca Potente plays it. There isn't enough on the page, but she makes so much of what there is. And I just think it's so much a part of this film in particular, and then becomes, you know, essentially a crucial part of the franchise going forward. But yeah, I think that in itself was so bold, and a big part of like what people remember about this movie.
Yeah, I feel like teenage me didn't know what to make of it because of, I think, the category error that you're talking about, Trisha, where I had been trained to, like, you know, in a James Bond movie, there's this type of girl, like, you know, tags along with James Bond, and they're this archetype. And it was like, wait, this is just kind of like a normal person who's like maybe temporarily homeless and just kind of like a drifter. And she's the it girl for the movie. That's such an interesting choice that it did like scramble my brain at the time of like, what is this?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and yeah, I think her character does a lot. You know, it does help. You know, we talk about this movie feeling grounded. Like, it feels, it's a small scale. It doesn't feel like it's other than those little montages we're talking about. It doesn't feel like it's trying to be really slick and cool and larger than life. It feels like it's just like, here's a guy who's trying to figure some stuff out, you know? And yeah, so
he
to
does
have
like
her
superpowers.
right. Which in
are
the
pretty
Bourne
cool.
Legacy, say it's because there's a certain drug they have to take, which is really annoying. It's
wow.
Really?
they literally midi-chlorian.
Yes, they do.
Bourne. Anyway, maybe on Bourne Ultimatum we'll do a little Jason Bourne Bourne Legacy breakdown. Yeah, postmortem. But like, she's just there. She's just a regular person who's just like, you know, figuring her life out too. And I think from a writing standpoint, that's a really smart choice. But then also from a performance standpoint, like, she just feels so raw. She's one of those actors, like, I think we've talked about like Laura Dern or somebody who just like, they don't even feel like they're acting. They just feel like they're just in the moment. Like, she does things in this movie. I can't think of good examples, but especially when she's like, how do you get my picture? Like, what would, you know, like, it feels like this is happening to her in real time for the first time. I do not feel like I'm watching an actor who like decided they were going to move their hand this way or walk this way or anything. So I love that her character kind of brings the movie to even more of a familiar place. It's like the polar opposite of like, now we're in the Treadstone offices and these guys are like, do it now. Like, you know what I mean? Like it feels like the complete opposite of that in a way that really, again, helps the movie with those like kind of vibes and that mood that I was talking about.
Mm-hmm.
There's that like, and it's almost, I think we talked about this, Michael, in relation to like sometimes like there's singer stars from other countries, like a Celine Dion or like a Shakira, and they feel less embarrassed generally, just being joyful or goofy or weird or whatever. And I can feel that with Franca Potente as well. Like she's not worried about something, being too awkward because she's playing it so real. Because like the way we would react to things like this in real life will look quite awkward because we're just gonna be freaking out and like not sexy as we're freaking out. And it is fun to see like a Laura Dern type performance where there's just kind of an unembarrassedness about it.
Totally.
Which once again, to teenage me was like, what? This doesn't compute in like cool spy movie. Why is this person kind of like being a sloppy human that's just like a normal person?
Yeah.
I do feel like in some ways she's like too good for the movie. Like you said, Trisha, like there's not a whole lot on the page for her to work with. And I feel like that's sort of this like weird tension that I was feeling watching. As I'm like, she's really good. This performance is good. They have good chemistry. Like I buy this. Why am I still kind of like detached from this though? And I feel like the movie is on one hand signaling like how important and critical this character is, and then also like not giving her that much to do or to work with. And even kind of structurally, like the midpoint is them kissing. Like it's a romantic like story, like structure basically in midpoint. So like the romance and their relationship is really important. As we get toward the third act, we go on, I guess the second act, we go to some relatives of hers or old
boyfriend, I think.
Old boyfriend. Okay. Yeah. So like there's this little like detour into like her backstory, and there's a scene where he's like, how are you and how is he? And like, it feels like in that moment I want to be really invested in like her and understand like strongly what her objective is and like what her obstacles are and like why Bourne is like the right person for her. And like I don't have that in the movie. And so it's these weird moments where this feels like the scene where I'd be like, oh yeah, I'm glad we're like stopping and like spending some time on the character. But because there hasn't been enough like build up toward that, it like kind of like falls flat for me. And so it's just an interesting aspect of this character in this movie.
I think that that's valid. And I do like long for a scene where the movie maybe would like, or the script would hang a lantern on it, right? Where it's like, where Bourne would be like, why are you still here?
Yeah, exactly. Like,
what's happening? Why are you still here?
This is crazy. Why are you still here?
And like she would get to say something, even if it's like, a facade or whatever, like if she would just say something about what the reason is. But at the same time, I think that there's an argument to be made, and maybe this is giving the movie too much intentionality, but I do think there's an argument to be made about the sort of blank slate of her character, not us knowing so little about her and about her backstory, that mirrors Bourne, right? Where there is sort of a sense of like this people who don't have a past essentially, or don't have a known past and don't have a known future, kind of just clinging to each other because that's all that they have. You get the sense even when they first arrive, before any of the like, action stuff goes down, when they first arrive in Paris and she clearly wants to stay with him, right? Where she like doesn't want him to get out of the car, wants him to invite her up. And, Franca Potente is playing it like, dear God, please invite me up. Like, I'm not going anywhere, right? Like, I can't stay here. I'm staying with you, obviously. There's a neediness to that I think kind of, I don't know. It doesn't give a reason, but it does seem compelling to the character. And I think that in itself covers like a multitude of sins for me, where it's like, I already knew before this guy broke into swung in through the window of Bourne's apartment and this whole like scene went down, I already knew that she was committed. Like I already knew that she was here for it, because there was nothing else for her, right? Like it doesn't seem like there was anything else for her where she was. And so, which I guess she was in Zurich before this, but there's that scene too, like it's a wordless scene where she's driving and he's sleeping and she's just kind of like looking at him. And it's attraction, but it's also like, I matter to this person. Maybe this person can matter to me. And maybe that's all that person has. And it's interesting that they do give us some expository information in like one of those scenes in the CIA offices where it's like, she kind of drifts around. Nobody knows anything about her, blah, 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 about why no one knows Marie. They give us a little, but at the end of the day, I think I wish there was more on the page, but I would argue that maybe there's enough. And maybe there's a thematic reason why there's not more.
That scene that you're talking about in the car where like the lines on the page are like, no, you go ahead. Like, I'm going to go. Like the text is, I'm going to go. I know this is a bad idea or whatever it is, but her performance of it is like clearly signaling the subtext if she really wants to go. And I feel like that's a great example of like her performance is doing so much work.
That's not on the page. Yes.
That's not on the page.
Yeah.
And I think it does really help that in that apartment scene, you can see clearly she also just needs housing. Like she's like, I'm gonna run a bath right away. I'm gonna brush my teeth. Like I need to, take a shower. And I think that also just helps explain a lot. That's where it becomes harder to explain once there's people shooting and jumping through windows why she wants to stick into this relationship. But there's a clear sequence there where it's like she just needs a home. She needs somewhere to be right now. And this guy has taken her in essentially. And that is a compelling reason.
And overall, there's a lot of lovely nuance to their romantic relationship that I think is really fascinating. Where, there is that scene where they do kiss and there's clearly a sexual relationship that's being implied or like explored there. But for the rest of the movie, it's not present really on screen or in the text. Like the sexual component of their relationship or the explicitly romantic component of their relationship isn't really as much in the text as much as some other like aspects of them needing to be together, right? Or like being essentially teammates in kind of a non-sexual way, right? When they get to the farmhouse, he's immediately like, I'll sleep on the floor. And even when he says goodbye to her and she gets in the car and to leave with her ex and his kids, he's kind of like, they just hug. They don't kiss. If there's not like, I need you, like romantic drama. It's very much just like, take care of yourself. There's genuine care for each other as people. Again, that's all nuance. But I think it's so rewarding to revisit something that's more complex than just like the slapdash 90s, like we fell in love. It's all sexual. It's all romantic. We need each other. Blah. Like that is so cliched and uninteresting. And the way that the specifics of how this plays out, I think is intriguing and kind of breaks a lot of molds in the same way that casting Franco Potente in the first place breaks some molds about like, wait, what exactly am I watching? This doesn't fit the pattern. This isn't what I expect from this genre. And I think, again, just kind of like shaking off some of those archetypes and tropes is a way that this movie succeeds.
Yeah, it's almost the opposite of the tacked on romantic thing that we get in a lot of like 90s action movies where it's like, here are these two characters, male lead, female lead, attractive. They have a whole movie together, and at the end they're like, we kiss now. And it's like, wait, why? Like that's just because you're just the leads in this movie, I guess. And this is almost the opposite, which is just sort of like the affection. And as you're saying, the sort of relationship that's building between them is more important than the actual kissing, sexual, whatever. It's like, yeah, that's there, but that is not the thing that we care about. And I think if I remember correctly, even at the end,
they don't even kiss at the end.
Yeah, they just hug, she's just happy to see him, and they're like, yay, we'll live happily ever after for a long, long time. But I also appreciate that Bourne is trying so hard keep her out of it, you know, and that scene right before the big car chase and everything, where he's just like, go away. Like, you can help me try to infiltrate this bank and like do that and whatever. And that's fine because this is safe territory. And then once it's not safe, he is doing everything he can to say, get out, like save yourself, whatever. And then she decides to stick with them. And then that gives us as the audience permission to be like, okay, it's okay now that he's putting her in harm's way because it was her choice. It wasn't his.
Yeah. One of the things that we talked about this morning in film club with our patrons was like the central question almost of each of these films. And our patron Dan, hi Dan, was offered as a topic suggestion, like, yeah, what do we think each movie in this trilogy's kind of central like dramatic question is almost, or like what aspect of identity or what part of like what is the mystery that each one is involved in. And so we can talk about the other ones when we get to those, but I'm kind of curious to hear your guys' take on that for this movie, because one of the things that I struggle with, and this is probably because I don't remember watching it for the first time, but the question for the protagonist is, who am I? Like, I don't remember my past life. I don't know why I have all these skills. And he's kind of on this journey to discover himself. And I think by the end, he discovers like a new himself and who he wants to be, I think is kind of where it's trying to land. But what was weird for me is that we're intercutting with Treadstone. And Treadstone is a character and an entity unto itself in all these movies. And like there's some repeat characters, right? The Brian Cox character will come back. Julia Stiles is there. And so in some ways, like it's cool to see that side of things, and it adds pressure because you know what moves they're trying to make. And so there's dramatic tension of, is he going to outsmart them, or what's going to happen when Clive Owen gets to the place? We need more Clive Owen in general and in this movie. But it also, for me, was signaling, oh, well, he's one of these like spy people. Like, I already know who you are. And so for a lot of the movie, I'm not really invested in Bourne's journey because I feel like I'm already like waiting for him at the end, was my experience. And I don't know if that's an unfair experience or me like leaping to things. So I'm curious for you guys, like, do we think that is what this movie is about, and how does it play for you guys? Alex.
Well, the person who's watched this movie the least, let's see what my analysis is. I'm with you, Michael, in the sense that it was a bit odd for a movie for an amnesia movie, which usually is like there's a big dramatic question of who am I, what is my past, you know, where did I come from? We are cutting to the people who know who he is and are talking about who he is and was throughout the movie, as opposed to being like a reveal at the end. The reveal seems to be the incident, you know, like what led him to be in the ocean, you know, which is this failed assassination attempt. But that doesn't feel particularly meaningful. Maybe there's a thematic thing with feeling bad about kids, which seems to keep coming up in these movies. Kids in relation to assassination attempts, you know, maybe just the innocence. So I'm also a little bit hazy on what is the theme, the dramatic question that all ties together in this movie, because we do know very quickly he is an assassin. I think they say explicitly he's a weapon, he's an assassin, we trained him, you know, to blah blah blah. And so we know that's who he is, and he kind of knows that's who he is. It seems like at some point you would put it together that you're really good at killing people, and you know these cops approach you and you just immediately put them down. So everybody kind of knows what he is, and the real finale revelation is just that specific incident that led to his amnesia somehow. So I didn't add anything to the conversation really, except for I kind of agree with you, Michael. I'm a little confused and would love to hear a Trisha or a Brian who have watched this movie more shed some light on it.
I'll also just say quickly that, you know, I do feel like there's a difference between what we as the audience knows and what Bourne knows in terms of the weight of it. It's like the actual fact of he's an assassin is just sort of like you guys are saying, it's just there. It's just like, that's who this is, right? You'd see the trailer, you see whatever. And yeah, there's a version of this movie where you keep that from the audience as long as you keep it from Bourne. But I think when Bourne finds out, there's such a weight to that scene. I don't know, where he's standing there in the street and he's like, oh, and there's two shots in the back. Like, just something about the filmmaking there or whatever. It just feels like this is such a heavy moment, even though it's all information we've already had as the audience. It still means so much to me to watch him learn it, you know? And then, yeah, I think there is a theme of just, if you look at Bourne and Marie, just this sort of them not knowing who they are, one for very different reasons, them sort of not being able to kind of get their life together, and then at the end sort of feeling like they've conquered that. You know, she opens up her shop, he for the time being has escaped from his situation, and they are sort of like, I'm finding myself. I'm finding my identity, for lack of a better word. So yeah, it's not one of those themes that's like, here's a monologue about how I feel about the world kind of thing, but I do feel like it's very much there.
Yeah. And for me, this movie, to an extent, all three of these films, but especially this one, really circles this idea of like, are you what you've done? Is that who you are? Like, is that your identity, or is it what you're doing now? Is that your identity? And so I think it's really interesting that, like, the central contradiction of the Bourne character, which is delved into more deeply in the next two movies, is that he desperately, desperately wants to know who he is. And then once he finds out, he desperately wants to forget. And can't bear the weight of who he is. And what he's done. But then the action genre as a genre is about choices made in the present. And I think that the genre itself, in the action and the way that it plays out, and I say action to mean all of the action in this movie, whether that's, you know, like big hand-to-hand combat scenes or, you know, jump down stairway scenes, whatever those are. But in addition to the relationship with Marie, the relationship with, you know, the CIA and all this stuff, all of that folds into the choices you're making in the present. And I do think it's interesting. It doesn't bring him any comfort to learn that he didn't assassinate a world leader in front of all of his children. And he also didn't choose to kill any children, which is great. But like that fact doesn't bring him any comfort, but it does inform the way that we understand the character, because that is a choice, right? And so I think that all of that kind of rolls into this thematic idea of like, you know, action is character, is identity. And so when he gets to that point of like, Chris Columbus's character, Conklin, is revealing like, no, you do remember, this is who you are. This is your identity. He has the ability to say, no, it isn't, because I'm just going to make a different choice right now. Like, don't ever come looking for me again, essentially. And again, that's explored more deeply later, but I do think it's a really interesting sort of thing that's being dealt with a lot in the text here. And you're right, Alex. I think you're onto it there with like, you know, we as an audience kind of have like a clear moral line about like anybody who harms children is bad. And so the movie uses those as like shorthand for like of like moral center, right? Like Bond might be an assassin, but he has a moral center, and he is choosing now in the present to adhere to that moral center, and has chosen in the past consistently to do that also. And like there's consistency there, and then there's clear decision making there that speaks to who he actually is. And so I do think that there's like enough in the text to give it thematic cohesion to an extent. It isn't like, I don't know if I would say it's like every aspect of the movie is doing theme or something like that. I don't think it's one of those movies where it's like absolutely everything is in tension and like theme is everywhere. I don't think so. But I think there's enough in it for me where I can kind of like, there's enough to sink my teeth into thematically that I think is intentional here.
Also, to translate for the listeners, Trisha's amnesia brain, I think when you said Chris Columbus, you meant Chris Cooper. And when you said Bond, you meant Bourne.
What, I did?
It's not surprising you would just say Bond when...
Well, I cannot wait to talk about Bond because...
But Bond also has a kind of a moral core, so I thought it still worked.
Thank you. Yeah, Chris Cooper's character. I do apologize.
Now I want a Chris Columbus.
A Chris Columbus Bond movie.
I mean, that's the third act of Skyfall, right?
Dear God.
Home Alone Bond.
But I was going to say, Trisha, on that point about where these movies go, I feel like in some ways, the next movie benefits from the setup of the first movie, because you can just right from the get-go, you've got this character where he is at the end of this film, and then you can really begin exploring further. And this movie now in hindsight feels almost more like just set up for like the real meat of the Bourne story, which is to come. So yeah, exciting stuff ahead.
Indeed. Well, why don't we go around and say what lessons we're going to take from the Bourne Identity? Brian, do you want to go first?
Sure. It's a simple one. We've talked about it before. We talked about it Mission Impossible, but I love a clear goal that I understand as the audience and that I care about. There is, I think it was maybe when we were talking about Mission Impossible Fallout, where I was just saying, like, there are times where the MacGuffin, I'm just kind of like, okay, why do they need, there's plutonium. Okay. But this is just like, who am I? I need to figure it out. I have one clue and it's in this city. I've got to go get to that place to find out the information. Now I found that information. Now I need a ride to get to this other city to find out, to go to this address, see what's there. Now this guy attacked me with a machine gun and his ninja moves, and I found one clue here. I need to go. And I just always, and maybe in the second half, it falls away a little bit, where it starts to get a little like, who's, Wambasi, and we're like, what's he up to? But it's just, it works so well for me when I'm just like, yep, I know exactly what you need, why you need it, where you have to go, what's in the way. Well, I don't know what's in the way, and that's part of the mystery, right? I don't know what you're going to find at the bank. I don't know what you're going to find at this apartment. Even if I know on a meta level, yeah, you're an assassin. That's probably what you're going to find out by the end of this movie, right? Or at some point in this movie. I don't know what is waiting for you at the next stop. I don't know what's in the way between you and your next goal. So I really love that sort of balance of, even if we are cutting to Treadstone, I'm still with Bourne, where I'm just going, in the immediate, I am as excited as you are to find out like what's behind this door, and there's guys coming. Where do we go? We got to go this way. We got to do whatever. And it just always feels very clear to me in a way that I like. And then, as always, we always talk about, the stakes are raised and the pacing, increases and everything. There's almost a Mad Max Fury Road thing where the first half is him running away and trying to find information. And then the second half is him coming back and taking on, the villain and everything. So yeah, that's it. Just make things clear. Make me know why your character wants to do things. Make me care about it, and then have them go places. And I care. The end.
The simplest things are often the hardest, so it's good to hear them over and over and over again. Yeah. Alex, what's your lesson?
I have a lesson, but I want to call out, because we haven't mentioned it. I love Julia Stiles in this movie.
Yeah.
I really love Julia Stiles in this movie. I love that she is just the most realistic, like mid-level employee in an organization who's just like, I can't do that. There's no resources for that. That's not possible. And a boss who's just completely demanding and, doesn't understand. She's the reasonable one. And I just love the way she plays it. There's something that just feels really great about it. So yeah, kudos to Julia Stiles for just nailing that role.
Let's make a note to talk about Nikki extensively in the next episode of the third one because I'm obsessed with that character.
Yeah, and I love that she keeps coming back. That's great. But yeah, my lesson is about the Clive Owen sniper sequence because that really stood out to me in the movie. And I was thinking about it, and one reason that sequence stood out so much was the setup, which is we introduce these new characters. There's a father and two children. They're giving them shelter. And it's the same thing that you do in like No Time to Die, where you introduce, oh, shoot, Lea Seydoux has a kid. And, oh, is that James Bond's kid? Uh-oh. Now there's people chasing them in a car. Oh, God, this is not just Bond. Bond is always okay. Bond can take a beating. There's now a child in Bond's car. The stakes are like infinitely raised. And so that sequence is such great setup with introducing those characters, and it's all their fault for getting them involved. And then you put them against this, the professor is what he's called, I guess, the Clive Owen character, who we've been building up to the whole movie. He keeps showing up. He gets kind of that dead drop from Nikki. And so we have the sense that he is going to be a formidable opponent. And so to have him show up at this moment when there's the most to lose, and for him to be a sniper, because snipers are really scary. You feel like you could just be surprised by them. I just think that was just really smart setup, and then even payoff. I love how we have literally a sniper rifle versus a shotgun. This is the two most opposite weapons. How does that get resolved? So yeah, I think this movie, while the whole feels messy to me, there are individual sequences that feel really special, and this was one of those for all these different reasons.
Yeah, I love the lack of music in that sequence where it's so quiet and the sound design is just speaking volumes. And also to your point about the setup, about him being a sniper, he's the one who takes out Wombosi, from a rooftop way over there. So we know he's accurate and can hit his target and everything. Yeah, there's just a lot of work done there.
It's a total non sequitur, but I also, watching this movie made me kind of nostalgic for when you couldn't get wide shots of cities, and so you would have to use stock footage. Because also in that in that sniper fight, there's stock footage of birds flying at some point. And I was like, oh man, those were the days when you couldn't just CGI up a bunch of birds. Someone go find some stock footage of birds that's gonna fit okay when we splice it into our movie. Anyway,
I was wondering what you were kind of quietly smiling to yourself as I was talking about a sniper rifle fight. I'm like, was it funny? I forget. I don't remember it being funny.
Yeah, just
the birds.
Stock footage. Trisha, what's your lesson?
My lesson is to rewind all of our brains and think about the Paris car chase sequence for a minute, which is something that was incredibly novel at the time. So they're in Marie's car. It's a little mini. They're on the streets of Paris. It's tiny. They're trying to navigate. It's daytime traffic. It's kind of rainy. It's kind of wet. There's Paris police everywhere. And they take advantage of all of those elements. There's motorcycles, there's cars. We're going to drive against traffic. We're going to drive across on the other side of a divided street. So there's a median in the middle, and we're going to go up on the sidewalk, and here's a phone booth, and here's pedestrians, and all of this stuff. It has been often imitated, all of this. It is, if you watch it now and you've never seen it before, it feels so trite and convenient, and you've seen it all. But it was so new. No one had ever shot a sequence like that ever before. And someone in our film club chat this morning was talking about how unglamorous this movie makes spying look. This is the opposite of the glamorous life of a spy. And that sequence encapsulates all of it, right? It's a crappy car. It's a crappy part of town. It's no one is cut out for this. We don't have the equipment we need. We don't have any support or anything. No one's going to swoop in and save the day. We just have to drive this crappy car around in Paris and try to avoid all of these people in a very unglamorous way. And I think it's iconic. And I just, the fact of it having been, the elements of it having been imitated so many times, I just think choosing things that aren't being done, just make it something you've never seen before. Just pick something else. We're still doing this. We saw this like last summer in the new Mission Impossible movie. It's like, oh, they're like in a little tiny car in like a little European city. Ooh, there's cobblestones. Ooh, there's stairs. Ooh, there's motorcycles. And they did some things. Like, I think my lesson on that episode was like the different things that they managed to pull off about that. But it's still this. Like, it all just comes back to this. And I just want to praise all of the choices that were made here, because like no one's ever done it as well. And it was just because they did something different.
Yeah, how many mini European car chases have we had since then? Because the Italian Job
1
came out
million.
soon after.
No Time to Die. Yeah.
I will say Ronin came out in 1998, which was a car chase that was like also European and like did a lot of the like driving against traffic and like stuff like that, to the point where I was like, oh, I feel like some of this is maybe even like an homage to that, because I feel like that's cited often as like one of the greatest car chases. But the like exact recipe of things that you're calling out was like definitely was not that car chase, and is a fun recipe that, as we're saying, has been reheated over and over again since this movie.
Yeah, I mean, going back to like Bullet and French Connection, there have been like those iconic car chases or whatever. And I think there's always been sort of that in the conversation. What do we do next? Dead Reckoning Part 1 was definitely like, here's what we do next. So you handcuff them, we put them on the wrong side, we put strollers in the way.
And like, shoot it.
We have this armored car over here.
Yeah.
Right. It is like, it's also okay, I think, to do a new take on the same thing.
Sure.
But it's always impressive, as you're saying, Trisha, to be the first to throw elements together that nobody has done before, and that you provide almost the baseline for the imitators that come afterwards, who can improve or try other aspects on it, but they're still using the same recipe that you first put forth in this movie.
Yep.
Yeah. You mentioned the French Connection, Brian. I finally watched that because that had been missing. And that's a really weird movie. I was like, okay, but there's supposed to be this great car chase. Like, all right, let's see what happens. And that car chase happened. I was like, okay, that was really good, though. I understand why that was so. That's a very good car chase. This kind of goes into my lesson, which was as the midpoint happened, where I forget exactly what just happened, but they kiss, like Marie and Bourne kiss, and then kind of after that, she's like part of the team now, and that's when they're going into like, it's going to be a heist sequence, but she's just like outsmarts him. It's like, I just asked, like, so like that pivot point is fun, and I feel like that whole kind of sequence felt like a sequence out of a rom-com genre structure, but like with action movie things put on top of it. And I was like, oh, right, you can like remix genre things. And that's really fun. And so that's kind of just my like lesson, is like a nice reminder of like, oh yeah, study genres and then find cool ways to mix and match them, because that's how you can create something new and fun and get it, like what we're talking about here, things that people have never seen before. So
I love that idea of, if we have all these breakdowns of story form by genre, Truby recently came out with that book on genre, and it's a fun experiment to think, can I make an action movie or a horror movie or whatever, but my midpoint, my crisis, my inciting incident, I'm actually borrowing from a different genre and putting them together, and what does that combination give us?
Yeah.
I think also, just really quickly, that little mini heist sequence where there's, sort of the build up, and then they like cut it all out, all the tension, where she's just like, no, I got it. I already got it. It's done. I think that sequence is so crucial because it gives Marie skills, right? Like, she's useful to Bourne. She's a fast study. She did something right. And that up until this point in the movie, she has been essentially like, not dead weight, but like he's having to, basically take the lead and kind of drag her along when it comes to skills. action movie type of skills. And so I just think that little sequence is super smart, where we just like her a million times more. It's like, oh, she's capable. Oh, she's actually very capable. And she thinks in ways that are different than Bourne. So she's a useful counterpoint to him in that sense. And I just think it like does so much for us investing in the relationship.
And it's another layer of this isn't that movie.
Yep.
You've already seen that movie. This isn't that movie.
Right.
Bingo.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like that's maybe like my favorite sequence in the movie. Like I definitely perked up. Also because it's a moment where Bourne doesn't know what to do or like is wrong. Like, because he's kind of just like magically great at everything the whole time. And so it's like a fun moment to see his expectations subverted.
Right.
Yeah, it's a good sequence.
And when he learns he's wrong, his response is like, oh, that was good thinking. Like,
Right.
Thank you. You know, he's not threatened by her in any way. He's just like, oh, thank goodness.
Right. It's also a reaction that's like pretty
Not
subversive
expected.
for
Yes, exactly.
2002.
Correct.
Yeah. Ahead of this time in a lot of ways, this movie. Okay, well, so before we get into what else we've been watching, a reminder that we'll be back next Friday with the Bourne Supremacy Part 2. That's going to be fun. There's more car chases. I want to talk even more about car chases and editing and all of that when we get there. So that's another mental note for us. But what else have you guys been watching recently? Alex, what have you been watching recently?
I have been watching Challengers. I've seen it twice in theaters because it's so much fun. If you haven't seen Challengers yet, why not? Just go see it. It's just so much fun.
My partner and I haven't found a third person to go with yet.
Yeah, exactly. It's just, it's one of those movies where I walked out of the theater just kind of buzzing because it ends on a really high energy note and I was just happy. And it's just nice to go see a movie that isn't about much more than just three really interesting characters and a lot of good scenes, a lot of really good scenes with a lot of tension, a lot of fun music, a lot of great editing, fun cinematography, just firing on all cylinders in the sense of it's not aiming for anything totally out there. It's just good filmmaking with good actors, good writing, and everybody's just having a lot of fun with these characters. And it's sexy. Like I was saying on our podcast page, like, are high quality sexy movies back? Like actually sexy? Because
hope so.
It's an actually sexy movie and it's actually good. Which is like, what is this? It's been a while. So I endorse this movie wholeheartedly, and I would recommend people see it in theaters because it's got a great soundtrack by Brian's favorite people.
Hey, try not to kiss. Luca, the director, just said to them, like, what if it was just house music wall to wall through the entire movie? And they were like, okay. And then they were just like, okay, well, how do we actually do something with that? How do we like do emotional things? How do we do turns and stuff? And I haven't seen the movie yet. I definitely am going to this week, but I've heard the score many, many times and really enjoy it. Although you guys making me watch The Crown, now I can't watch Josh O'Connor in this or La Camera without just expecting him to be like, one can smell the stench of the poor or whatever. Just like doing this, like, yeah.
He's still an asshole, but he's a different kind of asshole.
Perfect.
On the topic of sexy movies coming back, so I think like my very first patron, something like that, when I launched Lessons from the Screenplay, this person went out of their way to like join and then sent me a message that was like, how do you make a movie without love stories? Because I hate how many love stories are in movies. It's like all movies need to have love stories and I don't want any of it. And I was like, you're a weird person. Okay. And I think that they cursed us because like then there weren't love stories.
That person cursed us.
That's how I felt anyway.
Wow.
Cursed us like humanity.
Humanity. Because there haven't been movies since then.
Well, it is wild because I'll see like on Twitter, I'll read some Twitter comments on a headline that's like, somebody studied, I guess, how much like sex and nudity was in movies in the last few years. And it was like way down, from previous decades. And a lot of people are like, good, like it shouldn't be in movies. Like sex is for porn only. Like it's just this really strange idea.
It's such a crazy
Yeah, like sex is for like sex only videos, and like
Our
movies are
entertainment
movies.
needs explicit violence and murder. That's the only thing that I will
Right.
accept.
Yeah.
It's just like a really interesting hive mind on the internet that has this like dichotomy. It's just, it was fascinating.
Wild.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, challengers. Trisha, what have you been watching recently?
Well, I, of course, surprising no one, caught Ethan Cohen's new movie, which is called Drive Away Dolls. And I really, really enjoyed it. It was Margaret Qualley and Beanie Feldstein, Coleman Domingo, Pedro Pascal, surprise Matt Damon, and a lot of other people.
Nice.
I just loved it. Like, I don't know. It's set in the 90s, 80s, 90s. It's set in the 90s. And it's about this, how do I want to describe this person? It's about a couple of young gay women who are just friends. And they decide to do a job where they're like doing a drive-away service where they're delivering a car. And, but of course the car turns out to have like, you know, a mafia hit corpse like in the back of it and whatever. And they just get into like a mafia situation and unintentionally. And then of course it's about like, sort of a screwball comedy. It's about their relationship and it's like a road movie and all these things. And it's just a delight. Like I just really, really liked it. I thought it was so funny. Margaret Qualley is so funny. She's doing an accent that sounds a lot like Andie MacDowell's. No surprise. But yeah, I thought it was hilarious and such a fun trip. So strongly recommend Drive Away Dolls.
Do you want to call out the co-writer of the movie?
Oh, yeah. Also, yes. Trisha Cook, who is Ethan Cohen's wife.
I feel like being named Trisha and being married to Ethan Cohen are both things you could
Listen,
vibe with.
aspirational. I've thought so much about her.
I'm sold on your description of that movie, Trisha.
Yeah.
I'm very sold.
Yeah. It's also very sex positive. So yeah, it's great.
We're back, baby.
It's about lesbian culture in the 90s, basically. And also, yeah, kidnapping and murder.
Remix
Coen Brothers
things.
movie.
Yeah.
It's a Coen Brothers movie, for sure.
Awesome. Brian, what have you been watching?
There's no way I could come back to the podcast after a break and not talk about Fallout, which is my favorite video game franchise, which is now a show on Amazon Prime. I never wanted it to be a show or a movie. I never cared. These are movies where it's like, or these are games where it's an RPG. You kind of craft your own story. So I was never like, this story has to be told, like Last of Us or something where you can just kind of adapt that story to any medium. But it's here and they made it, and Jonathan Nolan and Lisa Joy made it. And I feel like it's way better as a show than a movie. It's way better as a show that can be extremely R-rated and over the top kind of like comedy violence kind of thing. Like people's heads just get like blow up kind of thing. And you're just like, okay, we're doing this, are we? It's interesting. There are, as a game fan, there are things that I love and things where I'm like, oh, I wish they didn't do it that way. And then as a screenwriter, there are other things that I love, and then other things where I'm like, oh, I wish they would do it that way. But in general, I'm happy it's here. I had a really fun time watching it. My partner and I have the Fallout cookbook, and we made like 4 or 5 different dishes from it. We made Nuka-Cola. I went full nerd. She just went along for the ride, and she's like, I love themed things. Let's do it. I'm glad it's here. I'm glad it's getting really positive reviews because it's just good for the franchise, and it's getting a second season. I'm really excited for that because they held a lot back. There was a lot of stuff from the franchise where I'm like, oh, there's going to be this, and then by the last episode, I was like, nope, they're saving that for later. So I'm looking forward to later.
Nice.
I just watched the first 2 episodes, and I'm really pleasantly surprised by how much I'm enjoying it because so far video game adaptations have not had a great track record.
Yeah.
but Last of Us and now Fallout, like there are some really good ones being made, which is exciting.
I also got to see the first 2 episodes in a theater, which was really awesome.
That's fun.
Humble brag.
Cool.
Yeah. The production value is great. Really great production value.
Nice. Yeah, I look forward to checking that out.
What are you watching, Michael?
So I just recently finished Shogun. Shogun is the historical drama miniseries on Hulu FX. It's just really good. I got really into it, and so it's set in what? Let me read. What year was that?
Feudal Japan.
Yeah. Back then.
A while ago.
Feudal Japan covers however many years.
Yeah. That's a small. Anyway, you probably already know about it. It's really good. It's cool seeing this kind of period of time explored and seeing Japan in, 1600s, 1500s, whatever it was, seeing the different relationships between the countries. I feel like they did a really good job of navigating, like, our protagonist is this like Englishman, like John Blackthorne. So he's like a stranger in a strange land, but like they navigate it really artfully in a way that like 30 years ago would have been like atrocious and they would have pressed all the wrong buttons. Like, it's a really cool exploration of the cultural differences, like a celebration, but also like a meditation of like, everyone's calling everyone a barbarian. What does that mean? Like, I don't know. It gets into a lot of interesting cultural things. And then the story is fun. It's kind of Game of Thronesy. And then it's like a power struggle between these different houses, for lack of a better word. And so you kind of get swept up in that part of things. And then also just the filmmaking is really gorgeous. Like, the actors are really good. There's one of the key characters is a translator for the English person. And so there's a lot of scenes where she's having to translate. And so it's these back and forth scenes that, if done, there's a million ways to do it boring, but they managed to find, because of kind of love triangles and dynamics, like the subtext of like, how is she going to translate that? Because like, we know how she feels about him. We know how he feels about her, but also he's this kind of Christian and she's that kind of, like, there's so many dynamics at play that it's one of those where it's like, it's a scene where it's just people talking and you're like riveted by every like syllable. And the cinematography is gorgeous. There's some really like slick camera moves during these scenes where there's translation and they like dolly such that it covers the translator. And so you're just now cutting between the two people. Anyway, it's really cool. I'm nerding out. It's really good. I enjoyed it a lot. So Shogun on Hulu.
Although, what the hell is going on with cinematography and these vignette things on the side?
Out of focus, the out of focus border.
I don't understand.
It's kind of like
cinematography, cinematographer's like, I want to do it to put you in Blackthorne's headspace, and I'm like, I'm not. I'm playing with the brightness on my TV because I'm like, something's wrong. That bothers me, but I agree that the show is very good, but that is a very, very strange choice that I find really baffling.
It was a little distracting. You could also tell there were several scenes, I think, shot on the volume, and like, I don't like that I can feel that already, and that it's distracting.
But it's hard when you're making 10 episodes or whatever of a show of this scale,
of a historical show.
And it still looks very good. It doesn't feel like a cheap TV show overall,
for sure.
Also, score by Atticus Ross.
Oh,
dude!
So
I think it's a big part of it, honestly, too. Just the production value of Shogun. It just feels like top to bottom, it's really talented people in all the different departments.
Yeah, a lot of care went into every moment.
Let's make a note to talk about the score of the Bourne movies next time.
Yes.
Okay.
Especially, Supremacy, John Powell's score, I really liked.
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you to our patrons for supporting this show and making it possible. Thank you to our producer, Vince Major. Thank you to our editor, Jose Gomez. I'm Michael Tucker. I've been joined today by Trisha Rand, Brian Bittner, and Alex Calleros. All of our Twitter handles are in the show notes. Send us a tweet. That still exists, right? I haven't been on Twitter in a while,
for
right?
sure.
It's still a thing?
It's a thing.
Okay,
It's a website. You can type things.
Yeah. All right. Well, send us a tweet, say hi, and we'll see you next week for our episode on the Bourne Supremacy.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.